So you completed the Ancient Age, now it's time to do some exploration. Before you can do that, however, you're going to need to pick a new civilization, and honestly, for this particular age, I recommend picking something that is either strong in terms of expanding or strong with culture, so cultural or expansionist. That doesn't necessarily mean, by the way, that the Hawaiians are the strongest pick for this particular age, but they are a very strong pick in my opinion for that exact reason. However, they're all pretty viable and playable, so just pick whatever you like. But keep in mind though, before you move on, that you have the option here in the bottom corner, it's very easy to miss, to change your mementos. You can pick completely new ones, and they will affect you for the next age. So if you want to, for example, switch to a little bit more of a diplomacy type of approach, then you can switch that in, or maybe pick some economic attributes, etc, etc. Don't forget, you can switch your mementos between every single age. The first thing you'll have to do in the next age is actually pick your legacies. And personally, I would recommend going with as many of these attribute points as you can get, and of course base your picks on what you actually plan on using. You always unlock special options, especially if you get the golden age in the previous era, but honestly in most cases these are things that are nice to have at the beginning but not particularly strong. For example, this option over here, getting 4 units, well, it's nice, but I can just build 4 units as well, and you're not going to be waging war on the first turn. At least that is not what I think you're going to be doing anyway. Settlement limit is another example. You probably have plenty of settlement limit by default already, so unless you're playing on a particularly large map, you're not going to be using that. Similarly, I'll just go through a couple of other options. The Silk Roads is one that I have almost always available to myself, but it just costs you a couple of 100 gold to turn your towns back into cities, and there's no real rush to do so. You can wait a couple of turns before you do that. Getting something like 25 gold or a couple of signs at the start of the next age is, well, nice, but it's not going to be able to compete with getting attribute points that are probably going to get you a whole lot more than that. Then the next thing you want to do is get yourself some ships, ideally at least 2 of them, one for each side of the continent that you're most likely on. Usually you can actually sail your ships around the continent, but for example, if like myself over here, you have an enemy settled above you on the edge of the continent, you can't actually get around. So you're going to need to sail one ship to one side and one ship to the other. You don't need to cover both oceans at the same time, but you're going to want to do as much exploring as you can, because after all, this is the exploration age and there's a very good reason for that. However, before we get into that reason, make sure you queue up cartography as your first scientific research. That is going to allow your settlers to be able to move on the ocean, and that is the way you're going to be able to settle those far off lands. In terms of civics, I recommend that you start at piety. It's pretty much the same thing as in the Ancient Age, where you want to found your first religion as quickly as possible because you get the best picks. Well, you're going to be able to upgrade your religion in this part of the game, and piety is what is going to allow you to do that. Those ships have a very specific function, and that is to find these tiny little islands that will be just off the coast. You're going to have to go into some of the deep ocean. That will harm your ships initially, but just keep sailing on and you should find a coastal line pretty quickly. Now what you're specifically looking for are these type of resources that say creates treasure fleets when connected to a coastal settlement. You want to find as many of those, and then once you have your cartography unlocked from your first research, you're going to want to move settlers onto these islands as quickly as possible. If you don't do it, the AI will do it for you, and you want as many of these resources connected to your towns as possible. These islands typically won't be the prime real estate that you're used to, but pick them up anyway, even though they're a little bit further away from your town, as long as they have valuable resources on it. You can even just pick up a couple of additional towns if you want to find particularly valuable resources on those islands, and don't hesitate to go a little bit above your settlement limit while you do so. This will catch up pretty quickly, just make sure you don't dive into negative happiness. Once you have piety unlocked, you'll be able to build a temple, and once you do that, you're going to be able to pick 3 upgrades for your religion. The first one is going to be all about the relics. It's going to give you a whole list of options in different ways that allow you to get relics for doing certain tasks. One of my favorites, especially on higher difficulties, is apostolism. which is going to give you 2 relics for the first time you convert a different settlement from another civilization with at least 1 wonder in it. Well, if you're playing at a higher difficulty, most likely the enemy will have built quite a few wonders, so it's just a matter of finding those cities, converting them to your religion, and the relics will start flowing in. There's other options that might be interesting to you as well, depending on your specific situation, and of course depending on the difficulty you're playing on, but make sure you pick an option that is going to give you at least a handful of relics very reliably. Now, similarly, you're going to have a founder belief that is going to reward you in some way for having your religion in other civilization settlements. And in my case, of course, because I'm going to actively aim for cities with wonders in them, Shrines of the Kami makes a lot of sense. It's actually a pretty substantial boost because of all those wonders around me, since I'm playing on a higher difficulty. Now, finally, you are going to be able to pick an enhancer belief that is going to give you some sort of upgrade to your temples. I like the one that gives you additional relic slots. Now, why all this talk about relics? Well, I'll show you. The culture legacy path in the exploration age is going to just require you to have relics. You also need places to put those relics, so this is where the upgrade to the temple comes in. But getting those relics is not trivial. There's actually quite a few of the relics hidden in certain technologies and civics, so you can pick up a lot of those passively along the way. But if you want to reach all 12 of them, you're going to need to put your religion to work. In order to do that, all you need to do is build a temple in a city or a town, and then get a missionary unit produced in that town as well. You move your missionary unit over to the enemy city, and once you're there, you spread your religion. If you do that, then it will automatically take over that city and put a majority religion in that city. If that's a city, in my case, that has a wonder in it, I will get my relics right away if it's the first time I convert that city. If it's not, I'm just going to get some other bonuses depending on what civics I have in place and things like that. There's no real benefit to spreading your religion all over the place unless you have specific quests for that, unless, of course, you get those bonuses from your religion, for example, the relic option that we picked before. Now, aside from the resources and the real estate, what you also want as many cities on these islands for, if you can, is for a very simple reason. You can spread your religion to them. That's not going to get you anything by itself, at least not in terms of production, but what it is going to get you is a lot of progress on the military legacy path. You get 1 point for every settlement that you make yourself in distant lands, but if you also make sure you spread your religion to it, you get another point on top of that. So that's 2 points for each of your own cities. Now, if you have like 3 or 4 of them, you can pretty easily get to the second tier of the military legacy path without ever having to go to war. So, by doing all of this, you should have your culture pretty much under control, your military under control as well. So what about the economics? Just having the resources on those islands in your borders is not going to be enough by itself. In order to get these points going, you're going to need to pick up shipbuilding, which means resourcing quite a few technologies before that, before you can actually unlock this. But once you do, you'll be able to start generating treasure fleets. Once you have the technology going, if you go to the advanced overview in your city, you can see how many turns it will take for the next treasure fleet to spawn. This is a little bit hidden, I'm not entirely sure why this is, but you will see those ships popping up pretty quickly after that. Once you have one of these treasure fleets spawn, fully loaded with gold, all you need to do is move them within your own borders, and then press the unload cargo button over here. This will give you either 1, 2 or 3 points usually towards the legacy path, and that will help you start to complete this. If you want to go all the way to the Golden Age, you're going to need at least 2 or 3 towns, most likely, in order to get enough of those treasure fleets. And you also want to make sure that you unlock the shipbuilding as early as possible, because in my opinion, the amount of points that you need is actually quite high compared to all the other targets, and it's going to take you quite a while to get there. Also, make sure that you actually protect these ships, because if you don't, well, the enemy will take them if they are at war with you, because they're very easy to kill, and of course prime targets to make sure you don't get any progress. The last legacy path you're most likely going to make progress on is the science one. Not necessarily the hardest one to complete, but it is going to take quite a bit of research before you can get enough buildings going to complete it. Because what you need to do is have 5 districts with a total of 40 yield on them. and that doesn't count the city center. So basically what you need to do is build a couple of buildings on the same tile next to each other so that they get adjacency bonus, and then you need to have a production of anything. Could be gold, could be science, could be a combination of any of those things, but it needs to add up to a total yield of at least 40. In order to get those high yields, I've seen people make entire spreadsheets out of which building needs to be next to what, but honestly, if you have only 3 guidelines in place, you're going to be just fine without overstressing about it. Rule number 1, culture buildings go next to mountains. The same actually holds for happiness buildings, but considering you want probably more culture than happiness, I would reserve the places next to the mountains for your culture buildings, unless you have plenty of them like I have over here, then by all means build some of the happiness buildings as well. Rule number 2, your production and science buildings want to be next to your resources. So make sure you leave some space for things like your libraries in the ancient age or your equivalent versions of those in your later ages next to your actual resources so you can get the bonus from that. And then finally, your gold and your food production wants to be next to the coast and or your navigable rivers. Makes sense because that's exactly the same what would happen in real life. So that is where those buildings should go. And then finally, pretty much every single building gets an adjacency bonus from being next to wonders. So if you can, build your wonders next to your resources or next to your mountains, because if you do that, then you can double up on the adjacency bonus for your culture, science, or production buildings. I would typically not stress too much about giving wonder bonuses to your food or gold production, because even though that's a nice little benefit, that is typically not what you're lacking. If you fully want to get the science path completed, you're going to need 5 districts with 40 production or more, which is honestly not easy to do. You're probably going to need to turn several of your towns into cities in order to build enough buildings in order to get those resources going, but if you can, then it is actually one of the most straightforward paths in this particular age. However, you're probably not going to complete it just before the end, so make sure you keep an eye on this timer because the AI has the same. So if several of the civilizations have suddenly a tile that has 40 or more and they are starting to progress through the legacy path, keep in mind that the first one is already going to progress the age by +5, and if you have 3 of them, it's a +10. So a couple of civilizations going to either of these barriers is going to massively boost the progress through your ages. All in all, I would say the exploration age in particular lends itself very well for a pacifist playthrough, or at least the pacifist age. There's really no reason to go to war other than to maybe nab a couple of these islands that otherwise are occupied by someone else, but if you're quick enough, you don't need to go to war over those islands at all. You can just pick them up yourself. Of course, the enemy might bring the war to you if you're that quick, but being able to defend yourself and just kind of sit through the war until the enemy gets bored of attacking you is a lot easier than actively trying to bring the war to the other continent, for example. Remember, these people have been here for an entire age already. They're probably well entrenched, and investing into an entire navy and things like that to bring your units to the other side of the world is a significant investment that's probably more worth going into your own cities in order to get that science path completed. Again, that is just me. I'm not going to tell you how to have fun and play your game, but keep in mind that this might not be the age where you want to have war. On the other hand, settling a couple of these islands as a forward base is a very useful thing to do if you plan on attacking your enemies in the modern age. Something to keep in mind while you're playing. Either way, with this particular strategy, I have been able to pretty consistently get a lot of points, typically even the most points, even on higher difficulties during the exploration age, so I hope you found it useful as well. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. If you're still here, you're awesome, and I do hope to catch you in the next one.